Okay, welcome everybody. So we are getting close to the end of this book. And so the way that it's going to go is that I think we'll have tonight and then we'll do next week. And then after that, I'm no longer going to post these on YouTube because if we move into the second book, if people want to keep going, then we're getting heavy into the Vajrayana. And I want to really make sure that stays super secret. So we'll probably still be able to record it. And if you miss a session, we'll be able to get the recording sent to you. But I don't want it anywhere in a public space because we're getting into the depths of these texts. So I just wanted to let you know that in advance. Maybe you can let me know whether you plan on continuing to come, and if this is worth it for you, then we'll go through it. Um, I think that there's a lot to go into with some of the secret Mantrayana stuff that people don't get taught a lot or get a chance to study very deeply. So I think it'll be a very special and unique experience. But yeah, that'll be so for people who are watching this on YouTube, know that it'll be just for people who are part of Denver Dzogchen Sangha. And if you're interested in that, then you can contact us through the email address that's on any of our regular podcasts. There's a little QR code, and you can do that and shoot us a message or just put a comment down below and I'll show you how to connect. So moving
Damien,
forward,
Damien,
yes,
could you send us a link to what the next book's going to be?
yes, I will. I'll post that in the WhatsApp. It's just the volume two, Light of Wisdom, volume two.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Right now we are on page 135, the view of ultimate bodhicitta. Explaining the development of ultimate bodhicitta. This has three parts: resolving by means of the view, practicing by means of the meditation, and linking up by explaining the result. Resolving by means of the view. This has points: establishing external perceived objects to be devoid of self-nature, establishing the inner perceiver as well as the individual self to be devoid of self-nature, establishing the examining mind to be devoid of self-nature, and the concluding the topic of the chapter. So we are coming at this now from the logical point of view, right? So in Dzogchen, we go through devotion and direct introduction into the nature of mind. And this experience is just direct, and it's a matter of having confidence in the blessings and the trust in the lineage to establish yourself firmly in that position. The other direction that the other schools, particularly like Madhyamaka in the Gelugpa school, emphasizes using the intellectual mind to wear down the intellectual mind to the point where you can also accept this same experience that you can get from pointing out from your teacher. It's good to do both, right? Because chances are you probably have some of your logical mind still attached to the idea that there is concrete existing objects and phenomena and people, right? Like we still believe in that or we'd be enlightened, right? That's a pernicious belief of ours. So using logic to deconstruct our experience, in addition to getting at it from the top down kind of approach, really, really helpful for developing certainty because the number one problem in all of the higher vehicles of practice is doubt, right? Doubt is the real enemy of devotion, of faith, and of insight. So we have to get clear about these things. Establishing an external perceived objects to be devoid of self-nature. So first we're going to look at phenomena and why they are empty. And empty does not mean non-existent. It just means that it does not exist in a solid, established, or permanent way, right? So it's not that you don't exist. It's just you don't exist in the way you think you do. And the same thing is true of phenomena. The Lamrim Ningpo root text says, in particular, external objects grasped by fixation are all unreal and appear like an illusion. Not permanent, yet their transiency is able to function. They are not singular, since a variety emerges and changes. They are not independent, but follow the karmic deeds. They are not particles, since partless atoms do not exist. If they did exist, gross things could not be assembled. If they had parts, this would contradict the assertion of partlessness. They are nothing but a non-existent and false appearance, an interdependence. Like dreams, magical illusion, and the reflection of the moon and water. Regard them as a city of Gandharvas and as a rainbow. Now, that just said a whole ton right there. And I'm no Madhyamaka scholar, so forgive me for my attempts to go through this material, but I'll do my best. So now follows the practice of ultimate bodhicitta of knowledge, prajna, which is superior to the conventional bodhicitta of means. So as we went through, there's the six paramitas, right? The first five are all of the conventional means of progressing along the path. And then you have the sixth paramita, which is wisdom. And this wisdom and insight is what makes all the other paramitas become great, right? They become a paramita instead of just an ordinary virtue. It's this wisdom into selflessness that gives those virtues their strength. So this has higher importance. As I said last time, each of the paramitas become progressively more important. Now, that doesn't mean that you leave anything behind. They're foundational, but you don't forsake the activities of a lower paramita for the activities of or you don't forsake, for the activities of a higher paramita, right? So the most important one is this one, is wisdom, right? So that's why, Dzogchen kind of built a school on that philosophy in some ways, right? That the wisdom part is the most important. And this is 100% true. But every master will tell you that you absolutely need the other five to support that wisdom practice. First of all, when closely examining through scriptures and reasoning all the seemingly real external objects grasped by means of fixation on self-entities, there is not even one that is real. They appear as illusory things conjured forth by a magician. Now, the simplest way that I have for coming to this understanding is you take a very simple object like a chair. A chair is basically a function of what it does, right? A chair is something you sit in. Now, if you take a chair and you remove a leg, is it still a chair? Yeah, kind of, right? You can kind of sit in it. You probably have to put a leg down to support it, but it's not as much of a chair as it used to be. Take away two legs, is it still a chair? And then it's getting really dodgy. It's like totally tipping. You remove three legs, four legs. If you remove part of it, if you can see where I'm going. The label chair is just an arbitrary distinction that we use based on the function of the object. But it doesn't exist. There's no chairness anywhere in the chairs, right? The chair is wood and screws and glue. But if you remove those things, then each of those things has little parts, atoms, electrons, molecules. It goes on and on and on and on. And you can't find a chair anywhere, right? And everything is like this. If you start dissecting it, the label that we give to something is not the thing. And in fact, it doesn't even correlate because a label is a concept and a thing is a sensory experience, right? So they don't even work in the same level of consciousness, but we bind all of this together into an object with a name, and then we just believe it's an existent thing because we kind of take it for granted because we don't look carefully, right? And this becomes how we relate, to the world as we come in to the world as a baby and as an infant, and our world starts to solidify and we're taught the language. Then we start to, build up the concreteness of our experience to make it functionable. But eventually that kind of concreteness limits us because it makes us think that there's something more substantial here than there really is. And it makes us misunderstand what experience really is. So by breaking this down, we can start to really understand how phenomena and the perceiver, quote unquote, exist and don't exist and what those are. So that's what we're working on. In other words, ordinary people whose minds have not assumed a philosophical view cling to perceived objects as being real and permanent. Now, that's the other thing too, right? Like we all know that everything will degenerate over time. Like even a chair, you leave it there for 1,000 years, it'll be dust eventually. People know that, but because the process of decay with most things is so slow, because change doesn't happen very quickly, then people assume that it's sort of going to be there forever. We especially do this about ourselves and about our family and friends, and we take it for granted. It's just always going to be here, right? This lack of wisdom into impermanence. So it's something we actually need to take time to think about, that everything is changing and everything is in the process of decay that has been built. In other words, ordinary people whose minds have not assumed a philosophical view cling to perceived objects as being real and permanent, while Tirtikas, who have adopted an erroneous philosophical view, believe in things being permanent, singular, independent, and so forth. These are, respectively, lack of understanding and misunderstanding. If something is a perceived object, it follows that it is not permanent because a permanent thing is devoid of action, as in the example of space. If something is a conditioned object, it follows that it is impermanent because to a deluded mind it functions due to the change of its continuity, as in the example of a seed or a sprout. So you see, let me look at my notes here. Um, So if it was truly permanent, it couldn't change, and if it can't change, it can't function, right? This is a important thing to think about, right? Function literally is change, right? So you can think like a can opener or something. You have to turn the crank in order for it to work. Its working mechanism is what makes it a can opener, but that means it is experiencing change, right? So the change immediately means that, okay, well, is it the can opener from a previous instant or this instant or a future instant, right? So then the solidity breaks down when we start to examine it in that way. But do not grab them impermanence. Permanent and impermanent are only words holding each other up, right? So both the idea of something being permanent and something being impermanent are two words that depend on each other, right? There's the truth of all dualistic concepts and phenomena, that they hold each other up. And so when we have one, we have the other. And what we're trying to do is break this all down. So don't get caught up if this becomes overwhelming or difficult for you anytime. Don't worry. It's not important. The main thing is we're using the conceptual mind to dissolve the conceptual mind. It's like two sticks rubbed together till they catch on fire and burn themselves up. That's the aim of philosophy and Buddhism. There's no philosophical position that you are trying to achieve that will make you a better Buddhist, right? Nagarjuna said, if I could be said to have a position, I would be wrong. But since I have no position, I cannot be shown to be wrong. The view of Buddhism, the highest view, is no view. That means we don't solidify things. We don't hold on to this belief in existing, non-existing, partially existing, all of these things. Those are concepts that we fix onto reality and then cause us to get bound up. So if you get overwhelmed by the complexity of this, I totally understand. Don't worry about it. Just relax, and just realize that this is especially for people who are very intellectual and logical, and they need a lot of this to really wear away their doubts. So if you already have faith and trust, then don't let this have any effect on you whatsoever. Um, so if something is a conditioned object, that means like it's a seed or a sprout, right? So that it has this process of growing. And at what point is it the thing, and what point is it as a seed, and what point is it a sprout, and then it's a tree, and so on. You can see the same problems of time and also of change. And that if there's change, and change is the function, like an object has a function, and the function is related to change, it therefore cannot be permanent. If something is permanent appearance, it follows that it is not singular because perceived things arise and change in manifold ways. As an example of different ways the six classes of beings perceive the same water. Traditionally, it's believed that each of the six classes perceive water according to their karma. So human beings see water, the gods see nectar, the hungry ghosts see pus or blood, and the hell beings see lava, right? So the same water element that we experience, which is a apparent modification of energy and mind that we perceive in a certain way due to our karmic vision. So the perceiver is also playing a role in the object that's being perceived. This is another important part, and we all know this to be true. Just like a person who has jaundice might see a conch as yellow, is a traditional example, right? The yellow is not in the conch whatsoever, but it's perceived that way due to the jaundice of the perceiver. So this is part of the factors that make it so that there's no concrete anything anywhere. It also follows that these manifold ways are in fact devoid of reality because they arise from conditions, as in the example of a rainbow. So, a rainbow arises when the perfect conditions of mist and sunlight come together, and as soon as you remove one of those conditions, it ceases to be. If something belongs to the three realms, it follows that it changes involuntarily because of following karma, as in the example of suffering of change. So, even if you get that dream car you have, then that dream car gets stolen or it breaks down or whatever, nothing stays, right? There's nothing reliable in the world of phenomena. If something belongs to karma, it follows that it is ultimately unreal because it cannot be established as being a concrete thing of substance or time, as in the example of something uncompounded. When explaining this in a more understandable way, all composite things do not last. That is, things that are made of parts means they must eventually come apart, right? So just remember, if it has parts, it'll come apart. Just like the end of meeting is parting, the end of birth is death. These are the dualistic conditions of relative phenomena. This is so because a permanent thing cannot possibly change into something else and is therefore non-functional, like the nature of space, which is completely unchanging. So space has no change, but depends on what is in space. Composite things are impermanent because their continuity changes in the following instant and therefore function superficially like the continuity of a flame or a sprout from a seed. And we can see this even more now that we know something about, physics at a micro level. We know that things are changing constantly. There's literally a process of changes nonstop. Can they be established as having impermanent existence, such as existence also cannot be proven because both permanence and impermanence being mere words that depend on one another, so on dependent phenomena established through dependency are also unreal. Right. So we're getting rid of and free from these concepts that we don't want our mind to be trapped by, and recognizing that even the concept of impermanence, because it depends on the concept of permanence, is also not reliable. As Pakshab or Nagarjuna said, if a certain thing is established in dependency, that itself is also dependent, right? So if something exists independent on something else, then both things are dependent, right? Because they have that dependency together. And if the dependent object is to be established, if it was real and solid and permanent, then how can you establish the existence of something dependent, right? How could it depend on it if it was really solid and substantial? Because it would be unchanging, right? So that means it couldn't have any parts, right? You can't have something dependent on something. It all breaks down, right? Things are also not definite in being singular objects. If they were, then since singularity and plurality are contradictory, it would be illogical for things to appear in different ways. Just as the same substance of water is perceived as molten metal by a hell being, as pus and blood by a hungry ghost, as something to drink by an animal, as a utensil by a human being, and as a nectar by a god, it changes with and follows the karmic perceptions. This manifoldness is also unreal because the existence of a thing's specific attributes cannot be established when the existence of a singular object itself is not established, just as the existence of a specific attributes of being beautiful and so forth cannot be established when the basis for the special attributes, the child of a barren woman, is not proven to exist. And so that was a very complicated way of saying the characteristics that we call like somebody being beautiful are dependent on the person who is viewing, and the child of a barren woman is like something totally pointless to say, right? Like they also say like the horns on a rabbit. It's something that doesn't exist, so imputing it is pointless. All things are devoid of an essence because they change into appearing as something else. All things are devoid of an essence because they are emptiness. So this is the essence of it right here, right? Because it changes, there is not something solid to be pointed to. Things are processes, right? Things are interdependent processes that change over time, and nowhere in there is a driver, right? No solid thing, no person, no self, no concrete established being behind the phenomena, right? There's just processes and parts. And we're just starting to get used to that feeling and understanding. And that's emptiness, right? And emptiness, like I always say, empty of what? Empty of a separate concrete identity. So every time you hear the word emptiness, ask yourself, empty of what? And also remember that emptiness and interdependence are synonyms, right? So things that are interdependent are empty, they depend on each other. A so-called creator, such as Brahma, Indra, or Vishnu, who has independent control over the three realms, also does not exist, because if he did, it would be impossible to reverse after having attained peace, and all of them fall back into the three realms dependent upon their white and black karmic deeds. So the existence of a separate creator doesn't work because if it makes the creation is an act of change, right? So it would have to be completely in isolation if there was a separate entity that was a deity that was all ultimate. Well, how would it change something without changing itself, right? That action, like we already pointed to, if there's action, there's change. So it falls apart, right? You can't establish that there's something permanent to establish there that exists in a concrete way. And then it also points in, the black and white karmic deeds. So this is the ongoing process of mental phenomena that we experience as pleasure and pain, and happiness and suffering. This process is undeniable, and that process therefore shows you that you can't have a solid, separate, permanent thing in that context. Well, then, can the existence of karma be truly established? Karma also cannot ultimately be truly established. Nagarjuna has stated, when all these phenomena are by nature devoid of coming and going, devoid of going, then how can karmic deeds and the ripening of karmic deeds have any reasonable existence? Being non-existent, also in the ultimate sense, they have no going whatsoever. Conventionally, there is the teaching of entering the path as well as of the ripening of karmic deeds. So you have a lot of different ways of these sorts of philosophies being explained. And if you study Madhyamaka, it gets very in the weeds and it's not easy to hold. The easiest way to hold all of this is the way that Shanti Deva presents it: relative truth and ultimate truth, right? Relatively, there are beings and phenomena and karma, and we do things and things matter, and it's good to be good and it's bad to be bad, and so on, right? And that's all legitimate experience. But we recognize ultimately all of that is passing, changing phenomena that has no substantial basis. So if we hold there's an ultimate truth and a relative truth, that's the easiest way to talk about and think about these things. So what's relative and what's ultimate? And the only thing that's ultimate is our true nature, right? This compassion, empty, aware, luminous mind, right? Like that is the only thing that is unchanging and not subject to all the rest of this. Everything else, even consciousness, arises in awareness, right? So consciousness is the perceiver that perceives an object. And when the perceiver perceives an object, those two are dependent on each other. Therefore, both are relative. So sometimes we think consciousness is the ultimate, but you need to back up even further to awareness, recognizing that consciousness is actually what engages with the sensory phenomena, right? So the contact that's being made between the mind and the phenomena, that's one dualism that arises together in awareness because you're aware of that process, right? So it's not back far enough, so to speak. Where was it? The Shavaka uh, Vaibhashikas, who are among the adherents of the Buddhist philosophical schools, have partial realization, except since all perceived things are unreal, although existing conventionally, the partless atom, which is the material finality that forms concrete things, has an ultimate existence because it cannot be destroyed by a hammer or the like. They believed that there was the subtlest particle that was permanent, right? But this also doesn't work. As well, they accept that time ultimately exists because the partless moment, that is the finality of consciousness, cannot be divided by the intellect. As the Treasury of Abhidharma teaches, when something can be destroyed or eliminated by the intellect, it will not be perceived by the mind. Like a jug or water, it exists conventionally, but ultimate existence is different from that. This position is, however, obscured by the darkness of unfounded belief, because the atomic particle is not ultimate, since the existence of partless atoms cannot be established. If it could be established, just as partless space intermingles with space, everything would mingle into one spot and therefore be unable to form coarse and concrete things. As it is stated in the 20, since it is touched at 6 points, the most subtle particle has 6 parts. So the dependency, if there's a tiniest particle, that particle has contact with space in different sides, right? It has to, if it exists as a separate thing, then it has to have contact with space at different points, right? It's not a single point. And so that is its dependency. So if these 6 were in a single spot, even a heap would only be the size of one particle, right? Like it would just keep going down. So you couldn't ever do it. It would be like infinity, right? Like if it was only one point touching one point, it loses all sense at that point. Since the particles have individual directions and therefore different parts by dividing them into east and so forth, this contradicts the former claim of partlessness. It also contradicts the belief that a single particles remain while touching but not fusing with one another, since it is impossible that particles of light or darkness would not interject between this touching without fusing. I hope that makes sense. So if there's contact between different particles and their change in relationship would change them, right? The change, as soon as there's contact, as soon as there's dependency, then there's change. And then, as we said, everything falls apart. If light or darkness cannot be interjected, there would be no space in between, and so this would contradict the former claim. So as you can see, it's just destroying anything you try to hold on to. I mean, whatever, and if you really have a lot of doubt and you're a very intellectual person, then you can study this till the cows come home. You can go study with somebody like Malcolm Smith, and he can break you of all of your fixation to intellectual solidity. If you enjoy that sort of thing, most of this goes beyond what I find necessary or helpful. Once you just kind of get the gist of it, it seems obvious to me. And so if you're in that place, then know you're in a good spot. The forming of time through a stream of instants is also a contradiction. If the former and following instants do not connect with each other, there would be no cause for the following consciousness, and therefore the former would not be a forming agent. If they do not connect, everything would become simultaneous when 3 instants meet at the same time, and consequently an eon would be nothing but a single moment. Were instants to meet alternately, there would be the former aspect of an instant that had ceased and the second aspect that was present, and thus having become 2 parts, this would damage the claim of partlessness. I hope that makes sense. The same thing with time, right? Time has beginning, middle, end. As soon as you have beginning, middle, end, then you have parts, then you have change, then you have concept. Yeah, it just doesn't hold up. And yeah, like I said, there's so many Madhyamaka scholars, Mipam and Nagarjuna, and modern ones like Acharya Malcolm Smith, who like this is their deal. They can really go into the logic of this, and their minds are like that. But I'm not that smart, so yeah. This being so, the acceptance of substantially existent objects of knowledge in fact becomes the claim of an extreme view and is therefore the lowest of the Buddhist viewpoints. Thus, they seem to have been taught merely to form a basis for characteristics. Demonstrated indirectly through this indication, the Santrikas accept that all knowable objects are composed of hidden components and have merely imputed existence. The followers of the mind-only school accept that all phenomena have true existence as being merely the manifestation of a mind. And this is the one that most of practitioners will have to wrestle with a little bit, right? There's this mind-only school, the belief that there's like everything is a manifestation of the mind. But this also doesn't hold up because of this same dependency we were talking about of consciousness and objects and the relationship between them. Let's see if it goes into a little bit more here. They are all nevertheless philosophical schools that are exponents of concreteness. So refute them by means of scriptures and reasoning and enter the middle way. So, at any time you try to impute a solid, substantial existing something, even if it's the mind, you're wrong, right? Like, because it'll start to fall apart. It becomes dualistic. It becomes conceptual. We are trying to stay out of concepts, but we also have this view that recognizes what it means. It doesn't just mean a blankness. It doesn't mean just not thinking. It means you actually have recognized this nature of things that is unchanging. And that recognition is what we're going for, but nothing can be really said about that except that it's awake and it perceives, right? Like it's hard to go much beyond that, and that it has love as its like way of relating, right? It's very subtle, and so just don't get caught with words. Don't get caught with beliefs. These are the things that lead to the deviations, like the form realms and the formless realms, are different concepts that we attach to. So just don't get stuck. Stay flexible. Allow your mind to recognize when it's tried to pin reality down and let that go, right? That's the main aim here. And if you need the logic and the philosophy to help you break up that solidity, then that's what this is here for. For these reasons, you cannot truly establish the existence of a single one of all the concrete appearances. So they're all non-existent while being perceived. So notice that it doesn't say that they're not perceived, because they are perceived, right? So there is this quality of perception. It's not nothing. That's not the same as saying something is not truly established as existing does not mean that it's nothing. It just means it's not permanent and solid. While perceived, they appear falsely and unreal. And so you can recognize this, right? Anybody knows like our dreams aren't real, right? We tend to just that's a given. But what makes our dream less real than this? Basically, it's just how long it lasts, right? Because the change in the dream is so quick. We experience something, we have a car, then we don't, then we wake up, then we're in this life again. That change is seen to be proof of its unreality, right? That's how we know it's not real, because it all changed. The problem is that the human realm, our experience of the earth element and the elements in general is slow enough in decay that it allows for us to engage with reality, to have intellect, to have understanding, to have realization, but it also lends itself to the belief that things are solid, right? And they're permanent and they can be established. But if only we were to speed up time, we would see that they don't exist, right? It's easy to establish, that everything is changing, therefore it is not real in the way we think things are real. If you go forward in 1,000 years from now, no one's name that will be even remembered, right? It's all will be gone. Any trace of us will be removed. So it's good to have a big view like that. For these reasons, you cannot truly establish the existence of a single one of all concrete appearances, so they are non-existent while being perceived. While perceived, they appear falsely and unreal. These perceived appearances are perceptions that merely arise in dependent connection. The interdependence, right? If the existence of phenomena could truly be established on their own behalf, they would never lose their individual characteristics and therefore not be liable to arise, perish, and so forth. But because they cannot be so established, all phenomena arising in dependent connection can manifest unobstructedly. Emptiness is therefore not hindered by perceived appearances, and perceiving appearances are not beyond the seal of emptiness. Nagarjuna declared, there exists no phenomena that do not originate in dependency. Therefore, there exists no phenomena that are not emptiness. These false manifestations that appear as mere interdependence are like analogies for illusory nature. See them as a dream, not existing externally, except as the manifestation of a confused mind, as a magical illusion, being mistaken for various kinds of appearances, for the coincidence of causes meeting with conditions, like a movie, um, as the reflection of the moon and water. So the moon and the water is not the moon. It is just the reflection of the light on the moon, and is changing based on the water, right? So it's not established, although it's still manifest. Appearing individually without being fixed objects, such as a rainbow in the sky, no matter where you go, you can never actually find that rainbow, but yet it appears. Appearing as various colors with no real substance. Regard them in these ways as it is taught, like a star, an aberration, or a flame, like a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a water bubble, like a dream, lightning, or a cloud. Thus should you regard all conditioned things. So these are just the different analogies to understanding impermanence and how things appear independence on the perceiver, and how these things come together. Before I move into this empty nature of the self, do you have any questions about the empty nature of phenomena? I know it's a lot. It's a lot for me too. Good to move. Okay. Establishing the inner perceiver as well as the individual self to be devoid of self nature. And this is the most important one, right? We need to recognize that because that's the one that we all assume to be real. Even if you understood that phenomena is empty, we still believe we exist, right? This feeling of I is so deeply rooted and controls how we go about in the world continuously. So we really need to dismantle. This is the primary insight of the Buddha and what leads to liberation. This grasping at an I is the whole thing. So this is important. Establishing the inner perceiver as well as the individual self to be devoid of a self nature. The Lamar Mission Ningpo root text says, the mind that observes is also devoid of an ego or a self entity. It is neither seen as something different from the aggregates nor as identical with these five aggregates. If the first were true, there would exist some other substance. This is not the case. So were the second to be true, that would contradict a permanent self, since the aggregates are impermanent. Therefore, based on the five aggregates, the self is a mere imputation by the power of ego clinging. Although the outer observed objects possess no true existence, doesn't the inner observer, the mind, truly exist? No, it doesn't. The mind has no existence apart from imputing such an existence upon the perpetuating aggregates and the holding the belief in an ego with the thought, I am. Since the two kinds of self entity are not separate from that, neither can their existence be established when examined by correct discriminating knowledge. When there is a belief in an I or a self, it follows that its existence cannot be ultimately established because it neither differs from nor is identical with the five aggregates. If, as in the first case, you could prove that there is a separate existing self, there would have to be a sixth aggregate of a substance different from the other five. Since such a knowable object is impossible, it would be like the name of a son of a barren woman. If the self were identical with the five aggregates, if it was all five of them, then it would have to be of identical substance. And since the five aggregates have substantial existence while the belief in an I has imputed existence, their substances would be contradictory. The five aggregates are based on perception or experience, and the I is a thought, it's a concept, right? So they're not even made of the same stuff, right? One is language in the mind and one is sensory encounter, right? So these are different kinds of consciousness that arise, and this is what the Heart Sutra is all about, right? The no eye, no ear, no nose, no taste, no sound, no touch. The form consciousness, no mind consciousness, no eye consciousness, no ear consciousness. These are the different aspects of mind and the different things they encounter that create our experience. Nowhere in that can you find something like a driver, right? Like something that is the essence of all of it. Because if it was different from it, then it couldn't really make contact with it. But if it was is inseparable from it, then it couldn't have parts and it couldn't change, right? We run into those same problems. If the self were identical with the five aggregates, then it would have to be of identical substance. And since the five aggregates have substantial existence, that means that they are sensory experiences. While the belief in an I has an imputed existence, we impute it with concepts, their substances would be contradictory, like the concrete and inconcrete. Again, to describe this in an easily understandable way, since the self cannot be observed as being some entity that is separate from the gathering of the five aggregates, and also cannot be seen as being identical with them, the existence of a self cannot be established. So I'm going to just briefly go over the five aggregates because it's important. Important foundational part of the Dharma. So one moment here. Okay. So the five aggregates are forms, sensations, concepts, formations, and consciousness. Forms. This is the physical side. Your body and anything physical you interact with counts as form. Sensations. The raw feeling tone of an experience before you think about it. Every experience lands of one of three things: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So before you even think, there's the experience of something being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This immediately first we have this we encounter a phenomena and it has one of these tones to it, feeling tones to it. And then that leads to, and this is how the belief in the self comes into being, is this process. This is why it's really important to understand. Third is conceptions. This is the mind grabbing onto what something is. It is a step where you take in a raw sensation and turn it into a labeled thing. This is a cup. This is my friend. This is a car. So the object your mind grabs onto can feel vast, small, or in between. So first we have just the form. Then we have the sensation of experiencing that form. Then we have the concept of what that form is. Then we have formations. This is the biggest category and it holds every mental state that is not direct sensation or just a label of what it is. It's everything your mind is doing on top of that feeling and labeling. Your intentions, your emotions, your attention, your habits of mind. These 51 different things break into 5 groups, 5 states present in every moment of mind: contact, attention, sensation, conception, and attraction. They run constantly in the background of any experience. Again, this contact, attention, sensation, conception, and attraction. The 5 states that pin down what you're dealing with: adherence, intention, recollection, concentration, and discrimination. These are what let the mind fix onto a specific object and work with it, right? So this is how our mind is placed on something, right? These are the different aspects of focus and relating our mind to the object. We remember what it is, we remember its name, we have an intention in the way we relate to it. I want this, I don't want this, all of that, right? So that is the basis of karma, right? So we're starting to deal with it or relate to it. So then there's 11 virtuous states like faith and shame and conscientiousness, all of these. And then there's the disturbances: attachment, arrogance, anger, ignorance. So the virtuous states lead to happiness and the unvirtuous states lead to suffering. Those relationships to the objects. So that this is why karmic virtue is important. Even if you have some established practice at the higher levels, you're still relating to everything as a self. And that self, that's whenever you're not in this, the highest level of practice, you're relating as a self, and that relationship between the self and objects creates karma. Um, so then the last one is consciousnesses. And this is the raw awareness itself, the knowing that makes experience possible. And it splits into 8. The 5 sense consciousnesses. This is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. It just registers the object directly with no interpretation yet, right? So we have the consciousness that arises in relationship to whatever object is encountering. And it does it through one of these 5 sense consciousnesses. So you either see it, you hear it, you smell it, you taste it, or you touch it. Then there's the mind consciousness. This takes what the senses picked up and examines it. It's the bridge between the raw sense data and the formed thought. So we have this, the mind. This is kind of what we're most identified with, right? This is what relates to the object. The disturbed mind consciousnesses, this is the accepting or rejecting. right? So when we experience pleasure, we grasp. When we experience pain, we push away. And when it's neutral, we ignore. So this is the foundation of the three poisons and where the sense of I really begins, right? The problem isn't in the contact, right? The problem isn't experience. The problem is the pushing, the pulling, and the ignoring. Those are the things that we do when we believe we're a self, when we believe we're a separate concrete, and we have to diffuse this process before that happens, right? So this mindfulness and awareness, as we become very attuned to the present moment, then a thought, a feeling, or a process or an experience can happen, and we can stay with the raw data, right? We can stay with the raw experience without labeling and pushing and pulling and ignoring. We just experience without that. And when we experience without that, then we don't have this sense of I, and we feel connected to our experience. And this is the reality of our experience, right? All of the rest of that is a story, right? It's all mental imputation that we are collecting in our mind that allows us to, really feel solid in a certain way, and then begin engaging in the world either virtuously or non-virtuously. And we're trying to be as virtuous as possible so that we can be in a raw experience more and more and more, short circuiting this process of what's called becoming, right? Where we become a self, right? We would come into the feeling of an identity. So how this all fits together? We had the disturbed mind consciousness, and then there's the all ground consciousness. This is the mind, sort of like the unconscious in modern psychology, but it's the where your karma is stored, right? So we have this direct experience, and then we have our I like it and I don't like it, and our memory, and all of that builds into a cloud of karma called the all ground consciousness. And that's what we really is our mind stream. This is what reincarnates, right? This is what follows us around. This is the contraction in true reality that we call I. It's the basis of it is this all ground consciousness, right? So it sits underneath all the others as the base they rest on. It does not reach out toward any object and is not actively involved with anything. It just holds everything neutral and clear without examining it or judging what passes through it. So it's like the store of all of our seeds, right? All the seeds, they get planted in this all ground consciousness. And that's why if you get into very subtle states of meditation, but it's not vivid and sharp and awake, but it's a little bit sleepy, this is where you go into the all ground consciousness, the alaya. Yeah, that's right, Ayrton. Yeah. So it's also called the alaya. And so you're settling into the alaya. So that's one of the deviations, right? Where you go into a meditative state of unconsciousness. This is why making sure your meditation is very vivid is an important aspect. It has to be vivid, sharp, and clear. The wakefulness that prevents this sinking into the alaya. So a sense consciousness picks something up, the mind consciousness examines it, the disturbed consciousness accepts or rejects it, and that reaction is what plants karma into the all ground consciousness. So that's the process right there. The whole deal, the thing we're all working with continuously. Formations, especially the 51 mental states, are what color that whole process as healthy or unhealthy. Sensation is the feeling tone riding along with it, and conception is the labeling that turns it into a recognizable thing. Form is the physical basis, body, and senses that the whole process runs on. So it said, again, to describe this in an easily understandable way, since the self cannot be observed as being some entity that is separate from the gathering of the five aggregates, and also cannot be seen as being identical with them, the existence of a self cannot be established. You see, there was no self anywhere in that process. You can see all these different aspects that exist, these processes and these things that we can observe, but there's no I anywhere in that, right? There's just the arising, the labeling, the grasping, the pushing, all of that, but there's no I anywhere in there. And like I said, I think that the kind of root of our identity is this karmic storehouse, right? We feel attached to our karmic storehouse. In the first instance, it is impossible for the self to have any existence separate from the aggregates, because an additional sixth aggregate would have to exist, because ego clinging applies to nothing other than the aggregates. Moreover, as no concrete thing exists separate from the characteristics of the aggregates, and as an inconcrete thing cannot perform a function, the self cannot be established as existing separate from them. Though the self does not exist separately in that way, can't its existence be established, as in the second case, as identical with the aggregates? No, it cannot, because the characteristics are incompatible. In other words, all the aggregates are conditioned and therefore proven to be impermanent. This is contrary to the self, which is held to be permanent. As in the case of assuming that one knows now what one saw earlier. Furthermore, the aggregates are composed of categories with many divisions, such as forms, sensations, and so forth, while the self is believed to be a singular, as in thinking I am. And the easiest way to think about this is that the world changes depending on your mood. Are you the same I when you were 3 years old that you are now? Are you the same I when you were 20? What about now versus 5 minutes ago? Everything is changing constantly, and our way of perceiving things changes, and the memories that we have, we remember some things, but we don't remember most things. Like how many of the days you've had do you remember, right? So it's not, there's nothing in there that you could call a self. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't exist. It just means you don't exist in the way you think you do. You are more like a collection of processes than a concrete thing you can call an I. And finally, the aggregates verifiably depend on arising and perishing, while the self is obviously experienced to be independent, as in the thought, I am. The Panjamula describes this. If the self were the aggregates, then it would arise and perish. But if the self is different from the aggregates, it would have none of the aggregates' characteristics. You may now wonder, though the self does not exist, its continuity is permanent and can be proven to exist. That also is not the case. The True Truth says, the so-called continuity or instant is false, just like a chain or an army or so forth. Just like we can say there's a chain, but it's really made of links, or an army, but it's really just a bunch of men or women, right? So it's just a name given to a collection, right? So a continuity of our moment to moment experience, you can't actually connect the two, right? From one moment to the next. You can't find how they would merge, right? Like if they were connected, then it would be one thing. But if they're separate, then how do they touch, right? Even time falls apart. While in reality, possessing not even the slightest existence, the self, the individual, and so forth are merely imputations, labels, made by the power of ego clinging, and are simply based upon the gathering of the five perpetuating aggregates. Entering the Middle Way teaches, the self does therefore not exist as something other than the aggregates, because it is not held as anything besides the aggregates. And again, in the same text, when uttering such words as aggregates are the self, it refers to the gathering of aggregates and not their identity. So you can't say the five aggregates amounts to this solid thing called the self, right? Because you can see the five aggregates are like processes, changing things based on what they're encountering and feeling about it and all kinds of factors. So there's no solid thing there, right? We can just observe these different processes. And as you observe these different processes, you realize that all experience is changing phenomena arising in awareness, right? So what's the refuge here? The only reliable thing is that loving, vivid awareness. We can't rely on anything arising in that loving, vivid awareness. We can't rely on the thoughts in our mind, the beliefs, our experience, this body. All of these things are unreliable. And we need to examine this to the point that we know that deeply in ourselves. Not just as an intellectual concept, like, yeah, I know. It needs to be so deep in you, it changes how you relate to things, right? Because if you see this processes of mind going on, these aggregates, and you recognize this pushing and pulling, and you observe it with your mindfulness, this is what we're doing in meditation to some extent, right? You watch, a thought comes, it abides for a little bit, and it goes away. And if you don't grab at it and you don't go on about it, it'll just sink back in. And that teaches you to let go, right? Attachment is the problem here. And so by allowing yourself to observe these processes and get familiar with them, then you disidentify from them, right? Because that's the problem, is we're identified with these thoughts, feelings, and experiences. We say, that's I. And when something I don't like comes along, I better fight to defend this I. And when something I do like comes along, I better get it and make sure nobody else gets to have it, right? All of the poisons arise from identifying with the movie. But we're backing up from the movie, and most people can, to some degree or another, back up from the movie of their experience, right? We can take a look back and we can talk through our experience and go, okay, I see this wasn't, maybe the way I felt like it was, and you can have a little bit of a story about it. But we rarely back up from this process, right? The stuff going on in here. So we need to back up even further and observe these processes of mind that we are mistaking for an identity. But so now what are you when you're observing these things? Well, you're not those things. So you're not this changing thing. So what are you? You're your Buddha nature, right? This is wisdom. This is the whole point. So what can happen if we're not familiar with these mechanisms is that we can have some kind of settling without the insight. We need the insight. If we don't leverage the seeing into the realizing that this belief in a self is what's happening, then we will just be relaxing, right? That's not the same as liberating. We need to liberate ourselves from our experience through wisdom, through insight into the nature of our experience. We can't just relax, right? Because when we just relax, as soon as you engage in the world, you're back to doing things, right? So the seeing has to be there. And that's why having a good understanding of all of this helps you to disidentify properly, so that when you're resting in your nature, or you're practicing, yidam practice or whatever, you're realizing that, what the problem has been, and what not to do, right? What not to reify, not to reify our experience, reify our thoughts, reify our beliefs, able to stay back from them and observe them as they change and not get so lost in the movie. So that was a whole lot of philosophy, more than I care for. I hope it was reasonably understandable. I know this is extremely dense and difficult material. I did my best to make it accessible. And yeah, we didn't quite finish this section, but that's okay because it's extremely dense. And I know it's not the most fun part, like we want to do the more emotional, devotional, energetic things. Like I'm with you. This isn't my favorite part, but I will say the time I've spent studying this has been worthwhile. We need some basis in this, right? We really need to understand the mechanics, because this is what the Buddha taught, really, more than a lot of what we're taught is methods, right? Methods that help us, but we need to understand why the methods help us. Why does visualizing yourself as a yidam replace the 5 aggregates, right? This is part of what we're doing. We're transforming, and so some of the symbols in the body and the mandala of the yidam and these sorts of things correlate to these abhidharmic aspects of the mind and experience, right? So we need to have some understanding of them. I know it's a little bit rough. Thank you for sticking with it. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we close? Was it okay? Could you understand a little bit?
Yeah, I'd like to say it was really wonderful.
Oh, good,
It was
good.
incredible. And I really hope that in whatever notes we get,
Yeah.
I have a wish that breakdown that you did of the 5 aggregates
Yeah.
was amazing. I've never heard it like that before.
Oh, I'm happy to share. Happy to share. Yeah, I'll put it all together. Yes. Oh, I'm glad it got through, because I was nervous to teach this, because this is way above my pay grade. But I have had some good teachers like Malcolm who really kind of helped me get my head around some of it. But there's so much more. And yeah, we'll talk more about it next week. Thank you so much for being here as always. I really appreciate all of you. Bow to all of you. Can't do it without you. So we'll probably have one, maybe two more sessions before we move into volume 2. So if you want to get that, go ahead and pick up a copy of Light of Wisdom Volume 2. Thank you so much. Let's dedicate the merit. By this merit may all attain omniscience, having defeated the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. Thank you and good night, everybody. And remember, we have Denver Dzogchen Lungta weekend starting tomorrow night. So that'll be really fun. We do half-hour sessions, 6 p.m. all 3 days, and then 9 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday, all mountain time. We're going to just get together. So come to some, come to all, but this will rejuvenate our energy. I know so many of us have been through it the last year or whatever, and you might feel kind of depleted. These practices are uplifting and powerful and happy and will help alleviate depression and anxiety and these things. So I hope many of you can come at least to some of it. I look forward to seeing you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Damien.
Love you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank
Love you.
you.